Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to share with you a secret truth of a life well lived. This secret truth was shared with me when I was back in college. Some mentors of mine came and challenged me with this idea that if you were to ask 80-year-olds that had lived a good life, how do you measure success? Where did you find the treasures along the journey? At the end of the day, what really mattered? The vast majority of them would say relationships. It's people. People they had impacted, people that had been impacted by them. That's what really matters. These mentors also told me that if you focus long enough and hard enough on a singular goal, you will almost certainly achieve it. You would naturally organize your life around that goal. Most people in the world organize their lives around money, convenience, fame, power. And if you fail to choose a different goal and be intentional, then culture will carry you towards the goals of the world. These spark of an idea became a guiding pillar of flame for my life. That if my singular goal was to invest in deeply and often in relationships over a long period of time, then my treasures would be compounded beyond comprehension. But what I've realized is people have a hard time understanding kind of relationships compounding kind of over time and the power that that holds. In fact, the human brain is really bad at understanding the scope and scale of compounding numbers in general. So I've started to use this analogy to paint a word picture. A long time ago, the emperor in India wanted a new game of pure logic. So the game maker came back with a game of chess. The emperor was so impressed, he said, "Name your price." Now the game maker, pretty crafty dude, said, "I only want a weekly allowance of rice, right, for every square on the chessboard. And as the numbers increase, double the number of rice from the previous square. So the first week, you get 1 rice, and then 2 rice. And by the time you get to the 8th day, or the 8th week, you have 255 grains of rice on the board, less than a tablespoon of rice. By the time you get halfway through the board, you end up with 4 billion grains of rice. That's 1.2 million servings. But what blows your mind is the second half of the chessboard, the power of compounding numbers. You end up with 18 quintillion grains of rice. That is 5 quadrillion servings, right? You still can't comprehend that. Our brains don't go that big. 7 billion people get a serving of rice every day for 2,000 years. The power of compounding numbers over a long period of time. I'd like to share with you a few of the ways that I've optimized my life around relationships and the impact that has had in kind of leading a life well lived. But before we do that, let's contemplate, what does the lack of deep and meaningful relationships look like? It's called loneliness. And we have a loneliness epidemic in our country right now. At a time when we have more people and more affluence than at any time in history, we are more lonely than ever. We have gone from needing a tribe just to survive to bowling alone and now scrolling alone. Just a study last year of 20,000 people revealed that most Americans have strong feelings of loneliness and a lack of significance in relationships. Half said they feel alone or left out. 13% said 0 people know them well. And each successive generation is worse. Another study showed that belonging is the most fundamental need we have as humans next to food and shelter. Right? Loneliness is real, and it sucks the joy out of living. So as my friends and I graduated from college, we really wrestled with this idea of how do you optimize your life and organize your life around relationships? Because we looked around, most people changed friend groups every 5 to 7 years. Right? They got a new job, they bought a new house, the kids graduated into a new school, they changed churches. All these things changed friend groups as they optimized their lives for financial returns and convenience. Relationships were secondary. They were happenstance, right? But we didn't want to do that. It was like, hey, how do we do this different? But we were already seeing how hard it was to schedule enough coffees and lunches and times together. So we bought a house right next to each other. We organized our lives so the relationships that we valued would be so convenient, we literally would trip over them coming out our front door. We've been doing this now for 12 years. Started with 3 houses, then 4, then 5. There are now 11 houses, right? With 23 kids under the age of 15. Life in the neighborhood is busy. We've also learned that life on life is messy, and it's hard, right? Taking a risk, being vulnerable can hurt, right? We've had to learn to forgive and to reconcile. We've also learned that life on life can be beautiful and meaningful. Daily, we're adding grains of rice to the squares on our chessboard of life. I've also committed myself to meeting with a group of men weekly. Right? Our commitment to each other is to love unconditionally, proactively speak truth in love, and to walk the paths of life together. Next to my wife, these men know me better than anyone in the world. An example of where you can see these relationships coming in was early on in my professional career as an entrepreneur. I was running a co-founder and CEO of a young company. We were doing great. Like, we were killing it, growing really fast. The problem is our growth rate was outpacing our cash flow. So I'd gone to the bank, had a line of credit lined up. Bank said, great, no problem. You guys look really good. And time drug on and drug on and drug on. And eventually the bank calls back and says, yeah, we can't give you that loan. At the time, I had 2 weeks of cash left in the bank, and I panicked. Everybody thought we were doing awesome, right? We were winning all sorts of awards. We were getting all great press. No one had any idea that in 2 weeks it could all blow up, and I was completely locked up. So I called one of the guys that I meet with. His name's Tracy. He says, Tracy, here's what's going on. And he said, hey, come on over to the house. Let's talk through it. So I drove home, parked at my house, walked across the street, sat down on Tracy's back deck. And what Tracy didn't do was try to figure out how to help me get money. What he did do was ask me a series of questions that changed my life. He said, Toby, if this whole thing blows up, do you still think I'll be your friend? I'm like, yeah, I think so. Like, do you think the friends that you care about will still respect you? I'm like, yeah, I think that they will. Will your wife still love you? Sure hope so. Yes, she'll still love me. Does God still have a plan? Like, yeah. Then why are you so afraid? You see, my identity had gotten so intertwined with the company that I thought if the company blew up, I blew up. If the company was a failure, I was a failure. And that's a really hard thing to deal with as a human. Tracy reminded me that the goal was relationships, not money, not success, not fame. And it really let me see, again, that perspective of how am I organizing my life? How am I optimizing my life? That day, I doubled the rice on the board. Another story is my late 20s, I was visiting with some of my mentors, and one of them stopped and looked at me and said, Toby, now that you're growing up, you're married, you've got a family, have you ever gone back and said thank you to your parents? Right? The idea exploded in my head. I was like, I've never even said thank you. Right? You see, when I was in first grade, my aunt and uncle, they adopted me and raised me as their own. They're a great sacrifice to themselves. Right? I never even said thank you. So that night, I got on the phone and called my parents and just said, thank you. Right? More rice to the board. Last story. This is my second company, probably one of the darkest and most stressful times of my life. We were very close to running out of money. We had extremely high expectations. The company had been doing great on a lot of different fronts. The pressure and the expectation from all those around me was so intense. It was one of the few times I felt like I was really ready to cave. We were getting ready to get onto a call with a very, very large prospect who had been testing our product. It was been a little bit rocky, and we're getting onto this call to see if they're going to move into production. And I knew if I could get them to move forward, I could get more investors into the company. If I didn't, I honestly thought we were done. I was walking through the kitchen, taking the call from home. It was an international customer. And my wife said, hey, are you ready for the call? I just started crying. I told her how afraid I was, that I thought it was all going to blow up, that I thought it was going to be over. And that the call starting in 15 minutes was the fuse to the dynamite that would light it all off. Right? She just held me. She let me cry. Right? Then she stood back and she said, if it all blows up, do you think I'll still love you? Like, yeah. Think your friends will still respect you? Like, I've heard this lesson before. Yeah. God still have a plan? Yeah. Like, then go and do what you are called to do. You have no idea how powerful that is. When you feel like the weight of the world is on you, right? And you have all these expectations, you realize, you know what? No, like that's this thing over here. The real treasure, like that's solid, that's real, that's right here. Right? More rice to the board that night. So these are some examples of how I have organized my life to lead a life of well-lived. Your approach, the way that you do this will be different, right? But one of the things that's crucial about this secret truth is that it takes a long time to realize the compounding power of relationships. You're going to be tempted to measure things like your job title, your salary, the size of your house, Those are easy to measure in the short run, but trust me, they have almost no long-term value. Relationships take time. It takes vulnerability. It takes us reconciling to risking spending time together, forgiving. One of the reasons that I think Pipeline is so successful is because we focus on people and relationships over long periods of time, and that's powerful. For a lot of people, as they approach the midpoint of the chessboard, they begin to recognize the power of relationships, right? And when they look at the amount of rice on the chessboard, they're saddened by how little compounding has taken place, right? This is what it looks like when you let 10 squares compound. It's not a lot, right? But if you continue to focus and you continue to invest in relationships over a long period of time, they'll compound beyond your comprehension, right? The great news is that much like financial investing, it's never too late to start. The people that matter most are sitting right next to you. They're back at your office. They're waiting for you at home, right? Take a risk, be vulnerable, forgive first, live reconciled. Proactively organize your life to facilitate deep and meaningful relationships, and use this secret truth to lead a life well lived. Thank you.